Well, thank you for joining us for the Southern Nightmares reading series. This is a monthly online event hosted by the Atlanta chapter of the Horror Writers Association. We'll be spotlighting both Atlanta Horror Writers members plus non-chapter members from around the world. We also encourage and challenge all the other chapters to do something similar. And I love what HWA is doing with the Skeleton Hour once a month. Those panels have been very entertaining. Y'all should definitely go check those out. And let us know about any events, reading events. We want to help share and promote those. More stories that we share, the better off we all are. So I'm Alex Hofelich, your host for this event. I'm one of the editors over at Pseudopod, and we've been bringing short horror fiction to your ears every week for free for the last 14 years. I'm honored to be working with Peter Salomon and Kitty Sarkozy and Jessica Ann York to bring this event to you. So starting out our evening, the Atlanta chapter of the Horror Writers Association features a book of the month. We take a publication from one of our chapter members and we read and talk about it on and off social media. September's book of the month is Javaja by our featured guest, Venessa Giunta. Venessa is a writer of weird things, an editrix extraordinaire, and a little bit of a nerd. She's published nonfiction essays, short stories, and the urban fantasy Soul Cavern series, of which Javaja is the first. There are 2 novels and 2 novellas, with a final book in the series, Hybrid, due out soon. So for those of you who like to wait for the story arc to be complete before making a commitment and getting started, this is your time. So Venessa, why don't you tell us a little bit about your series and set us up before you go into your reading?
Hey, thanks, Alex. My series is an urban fantasy and it has lots of horrific elements in it. It is I like to call it my vampire not vampire series, because the monsters in it are what we think of as vampires, but they're not. So what I'm going to read today is actually going to be the beginning. I was torn between this or a dream sequence that is really gross and, really creepy, which I really love to read aloud, but it is not in the main character's point of view. It's in her father's point of view. So I thought instead I'd just go ahead and give you the very beginning of the book and introduce you to the main character. So we're going to start. I have a short prologue at the beginning. I know some people hate prologues, but that's okay. That's okay. I still like you. So, all right. So let's go ahead and get started. Prologue. You have to be very careful when you touch people, Mecca, her father murmurs as he kneels on the warm ground, pulling weeds out of the flower bed. He brushes the back of his gloved hand over his forehead, wiping away a faint gleam of sweat. You're still learning to use your gift, and you could hurt people. She nods. The plastic beads on the ends of her braids click against each other with a muted sound. That's why you don't want me to touch Mom. He exhales and leans back on his ankles as he looks up at her. She wishes her eyes were like his. When he looks at her, his love shows in his bright, dark blue eyes. Yes, he says, Mom is sick and she needs all her energy. I know you're careful and I know you love her very much, but you can't control it yet. You wouldn't mean to, but could accidentally make her worse. Do you understand what I mean? Even at 11, she knows how much it hurts him to forbid her to touch her mother. She understands why too, but she hates it. She hates it more than peas, more than cleaning her room, and more than cough medicine. And she hates herself for having the gift that keeps her from her mom. Yes, I understand, she replies. I get it. I just wish there was a way. He grabs her arm and pulls her into a bear hug. I know, baby, I'm so sorry. I hate doing this to you. When you're older, when you learn more. Her tears spill onto his thin white t-shirt as she wraps her arms around his neck and weeps into his shoulder. He smells of earth and sweat. She stays with him for a while after she stops crying. Watching him work in the earth, planting new flowers, she can pretend her life isn't the freak show it really is. She can imagine running home and hugging her mom without having to make sure there's something between their skin. In her thoughts, in her wishes, skin to skin means nothing. Later, she wanders behind the house and down to the pond. It's large enough to be home to many fish, birds, and animals, but not so big that a bunch of people come to play in it. She never sees boats or even swimmers here. That's why she comes. It's quiet. An expanse of trees backs up along the pond's bank, and she catches sight of a doe with her fawn just as they catch sight of her. They dart into the safety of the trees, leaving her behind. Where the pathway goes into the trees, she continues along the water's edge until she reaches the flat, smooth boulder at the waterline. She loves this rock. Surrounded by trees and brush, this is her spot, her rock. She climbs to the top and sits, her legs stretched in front of her. A magnificent bird swoops across the still water, looking for fish. It had rained earlier, and her keds are dirty from the walk through the woods. With one finger, she flicks a spot of mud from her toe. Stupid gift. Why couldn't it skip me like it did Dad? A ladybug flutters past her nose and lands on the tip of her shoelace. It crawls along until it comes to the end where her lace leans against her ankle. The bug hesitates a moment and then creeps onto her soft brown skin, a tiny red spot moving along her leg. She watches and feels the tiny tickle from its movement. Her anger at her life still bubbles below the surface, but she's happy to watch this small, pretty little thing living its carefree life in a way hers would never be. She sighs, and then a sharp little tingle slips from that tiny bug spot and up through her body, a feeling that reminded her of putting her tongue on a 9-volt battery. The tickle stops, and she watches wide-eyed as the ladybug slides down her leg, bounces off the tongue of her shoe, and falls to the hard surface of the rock. It is dead. She clamps her palm over her mouth and cries into it. She scoots away on her backside, then draws her knees up to her chest, bends her head, and sobs. Chapter 1. Darkness cloaked the back parking lot in Little 5 Points. On the asphalt, the man shuddered and gasped, his dusky blue eyes wide in his confusion. Mecca Trudeau, her fingers wrapped around his wrist, held her own fear at bay by the need for survival. A confused grimace transformed the man's face into an ugly alabaster mask. Mecca's heart thumped hard against her breastbone. Everything had happened so fast. His attack, her response. Now, crouched over him, she found the arm in her grasp thinning, becoming more frail until she could feel the actual bone between her fingers. His dark hair grayed and then wafted to the concrete like so many delicate feathers. He withered. Superimposed over his form like a double exposed negative, the cavern where his soul would have resided spread before her. It should have been bathed in golden light. Instead, a small ball of gold looked to be tethered to the walls with thick silver gray tendrils. She closed her eyes to block out the reality behind the image of the cavern. She tugged at that golden life force within him. Its colored fringes had already washed out to a pale pink. The silver tethers which held it stretched and then popped one by one. Mecca surrounded the sad little ball with her own energy, gold with blue fringes, as it began to come away. The captive energy swung free from its bonds, momentarily bathing the dark, dank, cold cavern in light. It hurled into Mecca. Her own life force, the little part of her soul she'd sent into him, crashed back to her, breaking her hold on his frail arm. She toppled onto her ass between the cars, sharp pain vibrating up her spine. Energy tore through her, mixing with her adrenaline. The red-hot spike shuddered through her body and along her limbs. It reached her toes and then bounced back and shot through her body again. Her skin tingled electric. She had no concept of how long she lay on the gravel lot. The acidic smell of piss coming from the ground made her queasy. The energy waned and ebbed until it settled into her and became familiar, became part of her own soul. With a long, deep breath, she pulled herself up from between the cars, leaning against the cool door of a Toyota Camry. As the energy finally began to level out, she realized that she felt drunk. Her fuzzy brain had trouble registering things around her, or even thinking for that matter, so it took a moment to realize that the blob in her field of vision was actually a man. He stood near the dumpster across the parking lot. Tall with dark tousled hair, he watched her with wide eyes. What she'd done began to sink in. Panic edged her thoughts. She looked down at the withered corpse, at herself. Dark droplets dusted her blouse. She touched the side of her neck and her fingertips came away bloody. The thump-thump of her pulse pounded in her ears. At her feet, the shrunken carcass looked nothing like the sexy man in the coffee shop who'd approached her so many times over the last few weeks. His energy had been strange, which had kept her from engaging, but today she'd said yes to a chat, and she'd ended up a murderer. She stared at the dead thing. The fear she'd been holding back crashed over her like a flood. She turned on her heel and ran.
So I love anything that's set in Atlanta, and massive props to putting something in Little Five. So what inspired you to put a new spin on vampire mythologies? What makes you want to build a better undead?
They're not undead. That's part of what makes them different. And that's the thing for me. When I go to write something, the thing that blocks me is everybody writes about this. What am I possibly going to write? So that's kind of the first thing I think of, because as a writer, I have trouble thinking that I can do justice to it, doing it the way everybody else does it. There's so many amazing, purebred vampire stories out there. It's like, how do I even compete with that? So that's like, I have a series that I'm kind of working on on the side. Well, I haven't been working on it for a while, but first 2 books are 75% done, and it's a zombie, not zombie series.
Right.
So that's like a thing for me, apparently.
Awesome. Well, so you're very active in the organization side of cons.
Yes.
As the second director of the writer's track at DragonCon and the write track for Multiverse Con. Mm-hmm. Since Multiverse is coming up and is free and is digital,
yes,
why don't you share with us some of what it's about and what's exciting you for that event?
Oh, I'm so excited. I love Multiverse. So you can find out more about it at www.multiversecon.org. And this year, obviously, we're virtual, so we're multi-virtual because we're clever. Yes. So what we really wanted to do, this is actually our second year. Our first year was 2019, and it went so well. So, this is awesome that we're not able to get together in 2020, but, it's 2020. What are you going to do? So it's really about fandom in science fiction, fantasy, and all speculative fiction, science fiction, fantasy, horror. Fandom is so diverse. There's such a wide range of people, genders, cultures, skin tones, body types. There's such diversity. And that's not always what we see at other conventions, isn't always representative of that. Or sometimes we'll see the fans who go, but then the opportunities to go to panels where they can see themselves in the panelists, it's kind of hard to find sometimes. So we kind of wanted to make this convention to reflect the actual diversity that's out there in fandom. And so that's kind of what's so exciting about it for us, is because it's really become very family-like. And if people want to check it out, we also have a Facebook group. You can just look up Multiverse, and we actually have a Zoom happy hour every Friday night at 7 o'clock. So feel free to come out and join us, and you can hear more about it.
Yeah, and I went to the first year. It was a fantastic con, and I'm looking forward to participating in the con coming up.
Yes, I can't wait.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Alex.
So our next reader is Kelley Frank. Kelley is a horror artist and author. She also writes film reviews for Dead, Buried, and Back. She specializes in creepy illustration as well as abstract work expressing her emotional states. She's also an asexual witch and an outspoken advocate for the strange and the unusual. And you can find her online at morbidsmile.com. So Kelley Frank will be reading from her short story, The Mortician Secret. I love the title. Why don't you set up the story a little bit for us before you take us in?
Okay. Well, The Mortician Secret takes place it's a story that takes place in the Atlanta area. It's about a mortician who has grown up being a mortician. His father was a mortician, his father's father was a mortician, and he's in a small town. So Kyle Zernt, his name has become associated with the profession of undertaking. Unfortunately, he's found some papers that his father left him before he had Alzheimer's, and now he's tempted to use them. So the section I'm going to read is where Kyle conducts a small experiment since he has a body that's available to him in the funeral home. His basement area was secure. A simple glance at the crematory told him as much. He needn't have worried. Everything was running smoothly as ever. The other body, with its crushed face, was still staring at the ceiling with a semi-shocked expression that reminded Kyle of the "I can't believe it's not butter" commercials. For the first time, he was a bit bothered by the chill in the room, the two bright fluorescent lights that reflected every pore and laceration on the dead boy's face, and the way the stainless steel cabinets and instruments gleamed. The room was still except for the dull sound of the crematory working away at the other boy and the buzz of fluorescence, so he turned his attention to the papers crammed indelicately in his inside jacket pocket. They were rumpled, but no more so than they'd been in the trash heap of his father's belongings. Kyle spread them out on his counter as he had so many times at home. He'd long ago removed the staples to better see some of the diagrams his father had copied so hastily from God knew where. He was looking for one incantation in particular, one that was supposed to allow some sort of communication. He'd skipped it for the more juicy stuff earlier, but now he searched for it again eagerly. There it was, on the bottom of the 7th page. For the speaking with and demanding advice from the departed. He didn't know if the minor spelling mistakes were in the original or the result of his father's ineptitude. Most likely the latter, knowing Dad. He read over the directions carefully. Not much needed, really, just the dead man's clothing and the dead man himself. It might have been difficult for a layman to procure such things, but Kyle dealt with dead people all the time. The clothing he'd removed and placed in a bag to return to the family or destroy on their consent. Being that it was torn, bloodied, and mostly destroyed anyway, as car accidents do, he doubted he'd want any of it. But he always held on to the items just in case the family wished. He pulled the dead boy's shirt, once a white tank top, but now a gruesome two-tone in red and white, from the carefully labeled bag, and, using one of the many pairs of scissors he left nearby, cut a small patch from the material. He didn't bother with any that had been tainted by the blood, keeping to the mostly clean side. That done, Kyle took the roughly 3-inch strip of fabric back to the corpse. It was still staring up at the ceiling, as corpses do. Following the instructions with the studious care of a man accustomed to tedious work, he folded the cloth at right angles until it was roughly the shape of a paper football. This he then pushed into the dead boy's mouth, just past a set of straight white teeth. Kyle looked at the book carefully. Then, looking around a moment, he finally spied his trusty scalpel, cleaned and sanitized amongst his other tools. Snatching it up, he considered his own left hand, held out in front of him over the dead boy with the crushed face. It was a soft and unmarred hand, the hand of a man who, as a boy, never broke a limb or shattered a tooth in the typical childhood accidents. He stared for an instant longer, before cutting a straight line across the meaty bit where the base of his thumb became his palm. The blood fell, as it should have, straight into the corpse's mouth and onto the cloth, where it blossomed cherry red. Kyle sat that way for a full minute, watching the red slowly overtake the white between the dead boy's teeth, and thinking about what he wanted to ask. It had to be specific. Part of him hadn't thought anything would really happen at first, but the ceremonial aspect of the whole thing had focused him in a way he only felt when he was deeply involved in his work. Had the phone on his wall, a mere 15 feet away, rung just then, Kyle might have been disgusted with himself. He would have bound his injury, called himself a fool, and answered the phone like a responsible person. Following that, he would have cleaned up his mess, chastised himself roughly, and burned the yellowed pages alongside the boy with the half-crushed skull. As he should. As it was, though, no call came. Kyle remained focused so that when he asked the question, he had supreme faith that he would get an answer. "What is your name?" There was no sound for a moment, and in that instant, the phone call still might have saved him. But suddenly, the corpse shuddered as though a current had passed through it. Then, like a death rattle forming words, he heard an answer. "Caleb. Robert. Smithson." Each word was like an exhaled breath, though the chest didn't rise or fall. Had Kyle been thinking normally, he would have stumbled back from the body and rushed upstairs.
I have a particular fondness for Mortician stories. There's so much rich territory there. What are Tri-State Crematorium is one that always gets brought up when talk about Georgia. What are some of your other favorite involvements of Mortician in fiction?
Oh boy. Well, I do watch, there's a YouTube channel I watch, and it's Ask a Mortician. I absolutely love her channel. It used to be a dream of mine to actually be a mortician, but it kind of freaked out my family too much and I chickened out. So, but I'm still fascinated with it. That like dead bodies don't bother me that much. So I don't know. I find, I think that morticians have been kind of underused in fiction. I don't see a whole lot of characters like that. And especially here in the South, they really intersect well with the idea of the Southern Gothic, because if you're a small town mortician, like I tried to, I wrote Kyle as a small town mortician because the idea occurred to me that this same family has endured in this same building for generations, burying the people all around them and watching the history rise and fall within the town. And so the mortician is kind of more central than like the politician or even the minister, because the mortician sees the end of all lines. It just strikes me.
Nice. I like that. Well, after we're done with all the readings tonight, people need to head over to your Instagram feed and take a look at your art, because you have some really amazing, some really tactile and fluid pieces.
Thank you. I have a couple. They're all like based on creepy stuff. I have little resin skulls, and I've got Ouija boards, and I've got paintings. So yes, please do. It's at morbidsmile.com. My Instagram is morbid_smile. So if you look at Morbid Smile in Google, that's me.
Yeah. And I suspect that your mortician would particularly appreciate the sparkly red coffin that you've got.
Oh, I'm sure he'd love that.
Yeah. Well, which mediums do you like working in the most?
Oh gosh, probably watercolor and ink. That's what I got started with. I really, my primary influence is like sequential art, so comic book style art.
Nice.
I grew up a hardcore DC Batman comics books fan with like Kelly Jones's creepy ink illustrations, Junji Ito and people like that. So ink and watercolor together make a nice combination. I enjoy resin, but that's my primary awesome. Love.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
So being part of a large chapter comes with the privilege of being able to easily access a network of like-minded folks, close at hand and regularly interacting. With the Southern Nightmare reading series, it was important to us as a chapter to, boost voices outside our immediate field of view. And with that, we're honored to welcome our special guest from New Zealand, Lee Murray. So Lee Murray is a multi-award winning author, editor from New Zealand. her work includes military thrillers, the Tane McKenna adventures, supernatural crime noir series, The Path of Ra with Dan Raybarts, and her debut collection, Grotesque Monster Stories. Editor of award-winning titles, Hellhole, At the Edge, and Baby's Teeth, and Lee's latest anthology, Black Cranes, Tales of Unquiet Women, edited with Genevieve Flynn. Yeah, the fantastic cover art is hanging out right there behind you. And so that comes out in the next week. And absolutely everyone needs to check this book out. It is absolutely one of my favorites for this year. So what are you sharing with us tonight, Lee?
Thank you for having me, Alex. Yes, I'm going to be sharing a little excerpt from one of my stories from Black Cranes, Tales of Unquiet Women. And this particular story is called Phoenix Claws, and it comes out of my own experience as a Chinese, third-generation Chinese New Zealander, and a sort of odd kind of tradition that exists in my own family, whereby we if we have a new partner, prospective partner, to the family, we bring that partner along to Yum Cha, that morning breakfast, and see how they cope with eating chicken's feet, or phoenix claws, which is the name of the dish, and their reaction. And of course, if they don't eat them, then they don't fit, and they're not going to be accepted into the family. So it was something I wanted to explore with my writing, and it's a kind of comic horror, if you like, a little bit different from the rest of the collection, which is extremely powerful. I'm so proud to be associated with it. And yes, you're right, Alex, it releases, in fact, in just 2 days' time, so I can't wait. I'm very, very excited. So anyway, I'll get on and read this little excerpt. It's just a very short one. The first claws turned up on Wednesday, 4 spindly yellow-coated limbs. I found them in my kitchen sink. At first, I thought they were a prank, a sick joke left by my brother-in-law Pete, or maybe even Finn. But Pete would have dropped by just to see my reaction, and I doubted Finn even knew where to buy them. I was ravenous, and it seemed a shame to waste them, so I clipped off the curled toenails with a pair of kitchen shears, peeled away the yellow skin, and boiled them up for dinner. There were 4 more in the sink when I got up the next day. I found another 4 congealing in my handbag. If Pete was behind it, I'd kill him. Only in my heart I knew it wasn't Pete. Kinzer was barely 2. There was no way a sleep-deprived dad would get up that early for a prank he wouldn't see play out. Besides, Pete didn't have a key to my place. I bundled up the chicken claws and stuck them out back in the compost bin. By Friday, my rubbish bin was overflowing. I had to arrange for an additional collection, but even though I paid the extra fee, the council wouldn't collect more than twice a week. The compost was already full, and I shouldn't have been putting meat waste in there anyway. The couple over the back fence had left a note complaining about the smell. I had no choice but to eat them. I cooked the claws in batches of 40. With a growing sense of dislocation, I boiled and soaked them, boiled and soaked them, boiled and soaked. I stayed up until the sink was empty. After a week, my freezer was loaded with stiff white claws. I had containers of cooked claws stacked on every shelf in the fridge. With barely any space for anything else, I was eating them for every meal. It was all I could do to keep the house clear of them. No sooner had I emptied the sink, and they were back again. Keeping them hidden from Finn was even harder. I started leaving work early to clear away the piles of withered claws that had appeared while I was out. Then, one Thursday, our usual takeout night, Finn arrived with the Massaman lamb curry. The spicy odor made my mouth water. By now, I was practically living on chicken feet, grinding my way through plate after bony plate of them. I'd eaten hundreds of the gangly appendages with their severed rodent tail sinews, chewed on enough mouthfuls of glutinous white paste to make me want to gag. No wonder my focus wavered when the smell of curried lamb permeated the kitchen. I didn't see Finn head to the fridge for a drink. "What's this?" he said. opening a plastic Tupperware where 3 dozen claws were soaking in vinegar. He peeked into the container. Hurrying over, I pushed him aside and thumped the lid down. "They're chicken feet," I said, shoving the container back at the back of the shelf. Finn stepped backwards with a look of disgust. He pressed his back against the counter. "I can see that," he said. "Why do you have so many?" Thrusting a beer at him, I slammed the fridge shut. "They were on special, and I like them," I insisted. "Luce, it's fine," he said, straightening up. "I'm not going to tell you what you can and can't eat." But when he cracked open his beer, the sound, like an accusation, bounced around the kitchen. He threw the cap in the bin. Later that evening, when Finn had gone home and I was clearing away the takeout containers, I spied the shiny bottle cap floating on a sea of chicken limbs.
So I think you sell yourself a little bit short on this story, because one of our associate editors, when they were reading through anthologies and collections, picked this one out in particular as a very effective. This story does a really good job of dealing with the challenges of introducing somebody to, to family traditions. So she picked this one out as particularly effective. And
oh, thank you. That's really kind. But it is interesting, I wanted to address that whole internal racism as well, the fact that we and we've sort of made them traditions, that racism can be a tradition in a family. That seems crazy, but in fact it kind of existed. And my husband pointed out, actually, I don't like those chicken feet. I don't want to eat them. And so, and so I feel the story has power in the sense that it came from a very personal place, and perhaps that's why. It pales compared to some of the other stories in this magnificent collection, which they've just blown me away. As they've been, our contributors have been overwhelmingly fantastic. So I am very, very excited to bring this collection into the world.
So what did you enjoy most about putting the anthology together?
I think it was the response. Everyone we approached said, yes, we need to do this. And I think, my co-editor Genevieve Flynn said, I'm so used to making myself small, and suddenly here's an opportunity to have a voice and to amplify voices of people whose experience reflect our own. And so to me, that was the most uplifting thing, was just how important this anthology appeared to be, and the demand for it by the writers themselves. And now, thank you, Alex, from the reviewers and commentators in the community who have said, yes, the time is right. And with COVID, we could have pushed it down the road, and actually some of our contributors said, no, actually we need to move forward. This is the time. We need to have these voices out there. And I think it's wonderful. It's adding to that discussion about diversity and unique and authentic voices, and have everybody having an opportunity to have a voice. So yes, that's the thing that's really excited me about this particular piece of work.
Well, and I think this one also kind of dovetailed in with last year you were recognized as HWA Mentor of the Year. And so what part of HWA's mentorship program do you wish more people knew about, and how has that really helped you?
Oh, look, I think, I'm really, really crap at promoting myself. So I think, and actually it was one of my Cranes contributors who said this to me once, and she said, service is how you get seen. And she's so right. And so I always jump in and say, not what can a society or a group do for me, but what can I do for them? Because I think that is, how you get the most out of a community. And I cannot express how much I think mentorship is important for growing new writers and also growing readership, because we need this new cohort of readers and writers and people who just love horror fiction to come forward. And so to do that, we just need to get the word out. So mentorship is really great for developing new voices. And I've kind of been at all places on this. In New Zealand, for example, I've in the New Zealand Society of Authors has a mentorship program, and I am I think the only person in the country who's actually been at every place on that particular program. So I was a mentee, and then I became a mentor, and then I became a selector, and then I became a convener of the program. And the number of wonderful writers we've grown out of that program. And the same thing is true of the HWA program. What a wonderful opportunity to work with a professional writer and upskill and learn, and just have someone else enthusiastic about your work has got to be hugely uplifting. And for the mentors on the other side, you get to get a sneak peek of the new talent coming through, and have a sort of a little bit of an opportunity to help mold those voices, and it's just hugely exciting. I never escaped a mentorship without learning something. And then there's the relationships that you build. Oh, wow, there's just so fantastic relationships that you can build through mentorship. Those mentorship relationships are some of the strongest that exist, and they go on forever. They just never finish. They just never finish at the end of the time period. They always go on forever, and I like that. I like that about it. It means a lot of hard work and a lot of stuff coming across my desk, but I'm excited about that. So. Yeah, I hope that anyone who's listening who has, it doesn't really matter where you are in your writing journey, you have something to offer, even just as a critique. So, if you've got a few things published, and perhaps you're good at short story or you're good at poetry, put your hand up to mentor someone who is just starting, for example, because you still have something to offer, and they're always short of mentors, because everyone's busy.
Awesome. Well, I also appreciate that little bit of that little bit of nudge, and I'm going to continue, since you're not good at promoting yourself. I'm going to do what I can to help out with that, and I really think that everybody should pick up a copy of Black Cranes and also Grotesque Monster Stories. So,
thank you so much. This is the cover of Grotesque Monster Stories. Whoops, no, you're not going to be able to see it. I've got to bring it down here. Also a piece of Greg Chapman artwork, and this is his work as well. He's from Australia. He's the president of the Australian Horror Writers Association, and he does some absolutely stunning work for the HWA as well. So I'm very grateful to have had his support on this project.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's been a pleasure to have you.
And thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much. Bye.
So our next reader is D.C. Phillips, who is the author of Frightful Fables, Tales That Will Leave You Screaming for More. He cites Southern culture and Gothic horror as two major influences. He draws inspiration from his surroundings, from the subtle anxieties of suburbia to the creaky halls of a Victorian manor. Derek is going to be reading an excerpt from Eternal Hills, an original short story which debuted in February's Georgia Screeches, an anthology sponsored by the Days of the Dead convention. Why don't you set this book and story up for us a little bit before heading into your reading?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So as Alex mentioned, I will be reading an excerpt from a short story that appeared in the Days of the Dead Georgia Screeches anthology, originally edited by Joe Moe and put out by Nicholas Grabowski from Black Bedsheet Books. It was billed as an anthology for fans by fans. So all of the stories that appeared had a really nice kind of old school horror tribute feel. And so hopefully you'll pick up on that as I read the piece that I will be reading. It was a very short story, and so I've essentially trimmed the prologue, the epilogue, and you'll hear what's in between. So again, this is called Eternal Hills. Dick's directions were spot on. Just as Bert began to wonder if the old man had been yanking his chain, the dirt path appeared. Mud sloshed dramatically under tire and pooled in ruts around the base of a faded sign that read Eternal Hills. The holy ground lived up to its name. The drive split into a veritable ant colony of superficial paths and more corollary tributaries that went nowhere, more often than not. Markers jutted out from the light fog. There were sporadic icebergs that stood in obedient rows as far as the eye could see. As he made his way forward, he observed that no monument in this front section could possibly date back farther than the 1970s. The in-ground plaques and conical urns were indicative of more contemporary trends. If memory served him correctly, grandfather should be buried along the outskirts of this phase. He was laid to rest when Bert was only a child, and the more recent wave of graves hadn't yet been dug. Following the natural curvature of the path, he veered toward the right. How peculiar, Bert mused. At every turn, the sun appeared to be setting along the horizon, dulled to a fuzzy gray by the cloud cover. It seemed to follow him, a gloomy companion. It caused a kind of melancholy to settle over him, but he didn't quite mind, as the feeling wasn't entirely unpleasant. He could have sworn he'd seen that flower arrangement already, too. The daffodils with the green tulle. Had he managed to loop around without noticing? No matter. He'd swing right at the next fork. He was sure he hadn't taken a right till now. Here the stones were older, with their weather-worn carvings and poetic inscriptions. This zone of the burial ground came complete with the occasional above-ground slab or modest mausoleum with oxidized doors, like set pieces out of a Poe story. Ah, there was someone up ahead, walking in the same direction that Bert was heading. By the looks of the equipment that encumbered his belt, he must be a groundskeeper. Excuse me, Bert called as he cranked down a window and slowed to idle. How do I get back to the front gate? With no sense of urgency, the handyman turned. He stood there, vacant-eyed. A shock of white hair sharpened the contrast of his dark, dull gaze, and a bucket, filled to the brim with underbrush and the remnants of an Easter arrangement, swung lightly from one closed palm. Just as slowly as he turned to face Bert, he turned again and ambled into the distance. The melancholy Bert felt minutes earlier gave way to a bubbling sense of dread. He would go back now. Offering a silent apology to his grandfather, he decided to backtrack the way he'd come, and that was that. With no turnabout in sight along the narrow path, he threw the car into reverse, stepped on the accelerator before consulting the rearview mirror, and slammed into the mildewed side of an ornate structure he hadn't seen yet. In fact, he hadn't seen anything like it in the cemetery until now. It was one of myriad low, square buildings that now stretched inexplicably in every direction. They were impossibly old, ancient even, with crumbling homage to nymphs and mythical beings. He had apparently slipped into yet another section of this sprawling tract. Although by now the clouds had begun to dissipate, the sun was not visible. Only its orange-red aura streaked fingers across the horizon over this necropolis. In that moment, Bertrand knew that if he managed to find his way out of this place, his mind was irreparably fractured.
So, yeah, we've got morticians on one side and a burial on the other. So it's a wonderful through line here. I think we're going to need to have a conversation in the chapter about best cemetery and mortician stories.
Definitely a theme running through tonight.
Yeah. So you've got several projects in progress, including paperback launch of your Frightful Fables collection and release of The Flare, 80s infused novella in the vein of Fright Night. You said that campy horror is a big influence on you. Where do these projects fall on a camp scale, and what are your favorite camp influences?
I would say that there is a fair mix of camp coming up, especially in The Flare. I'm really excited about it. I think it'll be a lot of fun for people to read. Working on a trailer right now that I want to get out as soon as possible. I think we've all had some pretty well-laid plans this year that haven't come to fruition quite on time. So it's coming, I promise. But that one is pretty darn campy. The humor is strong in it, but I think there's still some elements that will shock. And in terms of Frightful Fables, that collection has been a passion project. Years ago I like to compare it to a musician releasing an EP, and now the LP is coming. And so it'll be the full shebang. You'll have all the stories in it. They're all, a lot of them inspired as well by the Gothic tradition of Flannery O'Connor, Southern Gothic, to Shirley Jackson. I know we all cite them as sources of inspiration, but
Yeah.
I especially love about their work is that, you finish a short story or you finish one of their novels and you think, none of those people were really likable, but you find yourself cheering for somebody for some weird reason.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that's what's a lot of fun about the Frightful Fables collection, because I think you find yourself rooting for people and questioning, should I be rooting for that person? Is something a little bit wrong with me? Spoiler alert, there's something wrong with all of us, right? A little bit. But I think, you'll find yourself either rooting for someone or potentially rooting for their demise, one way or the other.
So what's your biggest camp influence?
At a very young age, I was exposed to a lot of movies on AMC, Turner Classic Movies,
Yeah.
in the lead up to Halloween every year. And
Yeah.
I would say two movies in particular probably shaped my style and my interests more than any other. As a young kid, can't explain why I was as attracted to them as I was, but Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte is one, starring Betty Davis. The other would be Straight Jacket, starring Joan Crawford, which was written by Psycho's Robert Bloch.
Nice.
So yeah, I've always loved the weird and been attracted to the camp and themes of that nature.
Yeah, and we're about to hit that season where we've got the AMC run up to Halloween with all kinds of great films. So
Perfect.
Well, thank you again for joining us tonight and reminding me about to go check the schedule and set my DVR. So
Yeah, can't miss it. Thanks so much.
all right. So our final guest tonight is Gini Koch. Gini is scared by horror stories, but as J.C. Koch, writes them anyway. In addition to writing about scary things, she also likes to do scary things like pay attention to politics, keeping up with the Kardashians, and play the stock market. So, due in large part to this, she has scary stories published in a variety of fine zines and anthologies, making the terror more worth it. One that I'm reading with my book club right now is The Cackle of Cthulhu, and I'm looking forward to reading your story in there, Gini. Now, tonight you're reading an excerpt of a story that appeared in one of last year's Stoker finalist anthologies, A Secret Guide to Fighting Elder Gods.
Yes.
So why don't you set up this anthology and this story before you head into your reading?
Okay. Well, the editor, Jennifer Brozak, asked us to write stories related to existing stories out of the mythos. So I picked Pickman's Model because that's one of my two favorite Lovecraftian stories. So my story in the anthology is Pickman's Daughter, and Harriet Pickman is 16 in human years. She's been in the realm for at least 100 years, however, and she's a human changeling who's just graduated from the realm's school for changeling called the Asylum. Her first missionary assignment, assisted by the far more experienced Bevo Zoar, is to go work for the Elder Gods in Phoenix, Arizona. And we start here during Harriet's first day of high school. Harriet was enrolled in all honors classes. She already spoke 50 Earth languages and had passed what humans would consider college-level courses before she was 10. Her teachers were fine, But most weren't enthused about their work like those at the asylum. Most seemed to have to spend more time making the students stop being disruptive and cruel to each other more than anything else. All her classes were awful, but the horrors of American history were the stuff of legend. The asylum prided itself on telling the whole truth about history, but the history teacher was blithely telling lies, half-truths, and whitewashed versions of events. Harriet managed not to start shouting corrections, but only by doodling in her notebook. Lunch was better. Marcella found her, and she ate with a group of cheerleaders who all insisted that Harriet try out for the squad. They were joined by some boys who identified as football players. For all her teachings, this made the boys prime meat. Harriet honestly couldn't see why, but she'd been faking interest all day anyway, so continued to do so now. But at least the lies these kids were telling her and each other weren't about huge events that had shaped their world. Lunch over far too soon, it was time for afternoon classes, which were unsurprisingly as bad as the morning ones had been. But her art appreciation class was an insult. Her father's works weren't even mentioned, let alone shown. When she asked about them, the teacher's reaction was completely unexpected. "That man was insane and a menace," Mr. Roberts said angrily. "He murdered his pregnant wife and disappeared 100 years ago. No decent museum would ever show his works, and even the museums that focus on the macabre would hesitate and likely choose a less infamous artist." He looked at his desk where he had his attendance roster. "Are you a relative of some kind?" The teachings had been quite clear. Never tell humans the truth. "No, it's just that we have the same name, so I've looked up his art." Mr. Roberts looked up at her with narrowed eyes. "I see. What did you think of it?" Frankly, Harriet thought her father was an amazing artist and that he'd captured those from the realm perfectly, as if his paintings had been photographs. But she merely shrugged. "They were okay, if you like that sort of thing." Mr. Roberts sniffed. "Let's get back to real artists now." He started blathering on about Michelangelo, and Harriet stopped listening. "Roberts is an asshole," the boy behind her, whose name she was pretty sure was Joey, whispered. "He doesn't like anything avant-garde." This was, so far, the smartest thing any human had said to her, and Harriet was somewhat impressed. Well, it had an meaning he wasn't a cool kid. She looked behind her. Nope, he wasn't likely to be an athlete. He looked like what she'd been told a nerd, geek, or brain looked like. Glasses with intelligent eyes behind them, uncool haircut, not dressed as well as the cool kids, lacking a lot of self-confidence, probably routinely beaten up by the bigger boys and dismissed by most of the girls. "Where I come from, we embrace the avant-garde." He smiled. "Where you come from must be so cool." "If you don't mind," Mr. Roberts said, and Harriet turned around. "Thank you. Let's get back to paying attention. You two can flirt later." This earned some titters from the class and disparaging snorts from the few cool kids in here, which confirmed Harriet's suspicions about Joey. At the end of the day, and per Marcella's urgings, Harriet went with her to cheerleading practice. The coach was convinced to let Harriet give it a try. Since the training at the asylum ensured that all graduates were physically fit to the level of their race, Harriet was what humans would consider an Olympic athlete. She described once and performed try. The coach managed to close her mouth, then nodded enthusiastically. "You're on the squad, Harry." The other girls cheered. It was nice, though Harriet could pick up that they were all jealous, even Marcella, which seemed odd since Marcella had been the one to drag Harriet to this in the first place. But the reactions weren't unexpected. Humans were identified in the realm as being small-minded and jealous at all times. A uniform was produced with a skirt even shorter than the one Harriet was wearing and a tank top tighter than the one she had on. It was going to be athletic, even fun, but it was for the benefit of those watching, so they could look at the nubile girls and think what Harriet was pretty sure were going to be impure thoughts. Now, the thing about the elder gods was that their idea of impure thoughts differed greatly from what humans considered impure. Sex was just something that needed to be done to create more of whatever the elder gods would need: servants, food, slaves, fodder. Impure thoughts were those that strayed from serving the elder gods. Harriet had had many impure thoughts over the years, but human impure thoughts had been explained. Certain changelings, of which Harriet was one, possessed great charisma. Those with it were expected to lure humans to the elder gods via whatever means necessary, including sex, if that's what seemed likely to work best. However, that was up to the changeling themselves. If you didn't want to have sex, then you didn't, plain and simple. She noted several of the football players watching, and Harriet was fairly sure they were watching her. Well, this was good, because that meant things were truly going according to plan. Maybe she'd actually like being a missionary. Practice ended, and Mother Estelle was there to pick her up. Harriet had been given a cell phone, of course, but she didn't need it to use it to reach the Estelles. The faithful assigned to a changeling always knew when that changeling needed them. Besides, Bivazor was in the car. First day go well? Mother Estelle asked, while Bivazor put his head out the window and barked at anyone who was nearby. I made friends with top mean girl, had several boys hear thoughts, made what my uncool kid, and I despise my art history teacher, and I believe he feels the same way about an excellent start. After dinner, we'll celebrate with ice cream. That's the end of that section.
Nice. I really enjoyed that anthology last year, and there's an awful lot of fun to be had in it. And Jennifer is fantastic.
Yeah.
Jennifer Brozak's fantastic editor. While your normal format is novels, what draws you to short fiction?
Yes. Well, as a novelist, I tend to write the aliens, Alexander Atlanta, they're both very funny. And writing funny all the time is actually very hard. It takes a lot of work, you know. Dying is easy, comedy is hard is very, very true. And after writing a novel or two or three where I've had to make you laugh all the time, it's really nice to be able to whip out something and write a really, really nasty story where the monster gets to win. So I like doing that. I like taking an expectation you have of how you think from a daughter is going to go is probably not how it's actually going, and I guarantee it doesn't. And I enjoy getting to do that. I like letting the monsters win. And I'm in my first, I do a lot of mythos writing because I like it. I was always a Lovecraft fan way back when. My first short horror story was in The Madness of Cthulhu, which was really very thrilling to get to be in there with all these, you know, mythos scholars and me. So it was very fun. I really like doing it. I write horror that doesn't have a mythos feel, but not as much as I write mythos horror.
Yeah. So when can we next expect? When can we next expect to see you in an anthology or a zine?
My next anthology that will be coming out should be Unidentified Funny Objects 8 from UFO Press. That will be coming out, I think, next month. And Galactic 2, Zombies Needs Brains, UFO is Alex Schwartzman.
Yeah.
Zombies Needs Brains is Joshua Palmetier. And that one just came out a month ago. We just finished a Kickstarter that will release next year, is about creepy ships in space or sea. And that one will not be mythos. I know, shocking. It is going to be a little creepy though, because you know, derelicts are creepy, so it's going to be creepy. No tentacles, I don't think.
Yes. Okay. Well, awesome. Looking forward to those books, and thank you again for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
So that brings our event to a close. The Southern Nightmare Reading Series will be a monthly online event presented by HWA Atlanta Chapter, spotlighting Atlanta horror writers and non-chapter members from around the world. Please join us again on the evening of October 22nd for another reading series. Our featured guest will be Peter Adam Salomon, whose collection Pseudo-Psalms Resurrection will be Atlanta HWA's Book of the Month. And the rest of our roundup is going to be a Halloween surprise. So until then, honor Halloween in your heart, and try and keep it all the year. See you next month, y'all.